Although there has been a large degree of integration between European Union member states, foreign relations is still a largely intergovernmental matter, with the 28 members controlling their own relations to a large degree. However, with the Union holding more weight as a single bloc, there are at times attempts to speak with one voice, notably on trade and energy matters. The High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy personifies this role. Policy and actors. The EU's foreign relations are dealt with either through the common foreign and security policy, decided by the European Council, or the economic trade negotiations handled by the European Commission. The leading EU diplomat in both areas is the High Representative Federica Mogherini. A limited amount of defense cooperation takes place within the common security and defense policy. Diplomatic representation. History. The high authority of the European Coal and Steel Community, the EU's predecessor, opened its first mission in London in 1955, 3 years after non-EU countries began to accredit the missions in Brussels to the community. The US had been a fervent supporter of the ECSC's efforts from the beginning, and Secretary of State Dean Acheson sent Jean Monnet to dispatch in the name of President Truman, confirming full U.S. diplomatic recognition of the ECSC. A U.S. ambassador to the ECSC was accredited soon thereafter, and he headed the second overseas mission to establish diplomatic relations with the community institutions. The number of delegates began to rise in the 1960s following the merging of the executive institutions of the three European communities into a single commission. Until recently, some states had reservations accepting that EU delegations held the full status of a diplomatic mission. Article 20 of the Maastricht Treaty requires the delegations and the member states as diplomatic missions to cooperate in ensuring that the common positions and joint actions adopted by the Council are complied with and implemented. As part of the process of establishment of the European External Action Service envisioned in the Lisbon Treaty, on 1 January 2010 all former European Commission delegations were renamed European Union delegations until the end of the month. 54 of the missions were transformed into embassy-type missions that employ greater powers than the regular delegations. These upgraded delegations have taken on the role previously carried out by the national embassies of the member state holding the rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union, and merged with the independent Council delegations around the world. Through this, the EU delegations take on the role of coordinating national embassies and speaking for the EU as a whole, not just the Commission. The first delegation to be upgraded was the one in Washington, D.C. The new joint ambassador was João Vale de Almeida, who outlined his new powers as speaking for both the Commission and Council presidents and member states. He would be in charge where there was a common position, but otherwise, on bilateral matters, he would not take over from national ambassadors. All delegations are expected to be converted by the end of 2010. Some states may choose to operate through the new EU delegations and close down some of the smaller national embassies. However, France has indicated that it will maintain its own network around the world for now. Locations. The EU sends its delegates generally only to the capitals of states outside the European Union and cities hosting multilateral bodies. The EU missions work separately from the work of the missions of its member states. However, in some circumstances it may share resources and facilities. In Abuja shares its premises with a number of member states. Additionally to the third state delegations and offices, the European Commission maintains representation in each of the member states. Prior to the establishment of the European External Action Service by the Treaty of Lisbon, there were separate delegations of the Council of the European Union to the United Nations in New York, to the African Union and to Afghanistan, in addition to the European Commission delegations there. In the course of 2010, these would be transformed into integrated European Union delegations. Member state missions. The EU member states have their own diplomatic missions, in addition to the common EU delegations. On the other hand, additionally to the third state delegations and offices, the European Commission maintains representation in each of the member states, where the EU delegations have not taken on the full Lisbon Treaty responsibilities. The national embassy of the country holding the rotating EU presidency has the role of representing the CFSP, while the EU delegation speaks only for the Commission. Member state missions have certain responsibilities to national of fellow states. Consulates are obliged to support EU citizens of other states abroad if they do not have a consulate of their own state in the country. Also, if another EU state makes the request to help the citizens in an emergency, then they are obliged to assist. An example would be evacuations where EU states help assist each other's citizens. No EU member state has embassy in the countries of Bahamas, Bhutan, Dominica, Grenada, Kiribati, Liberia, Liechtenstein, Maldives, Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Nauru, Palau, St. Kitts and Nevis, Samoa, Somalia, Swaziland, Tonga, Tuvalu, the sovereign entity Sovereign Military Order of Malta, and the partially recognized countries Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic and Republic of China. The European Commission also has no delegations or offices to most of them. The following countries host only a single embassy of EU member state: Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, Belize, Central African Republic, Comoros, Djibouti, Gambia, Guyana, Lesotho, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, San Marino, Sao Tome and Principe, Solomon Islands, Timor-Leste, Vanuatu. The European Commission also has no delegations or offices to most of them. Relations: Africa and the Middle East, the Americas, Asia Pacific, Europe and Central Asia. Partly recognized states ACP countries. The European Union's member states retain close links with many of the former colonies, and since the Treaty of Rome there has been a relationship between the Union and the African, Caribbean and Pacific countries in the form of ACP-EU development cooperation, including a joint parliamentary assembly. The EU is also a leading provider of humanitarian aid, with over 20% of aid received in the ACP coming from the EU budget or from the European Development Fund. In April 2007, the Commission offered ACP countries greater access to the EU market, tariff-free rice exports with duty and quota-free sugar exports. However, this offer is being fought by France, who, along with other countries, wish to dilute the offer. There are questions as to whether the special relationship between the ACP group and the European Union will be maintained after the coming to the end of the Cotonou Partnership Agreement Treaty in 2020. The ACP has begun looking into the future of the group and its relationship to the European Union. Independent think tanks such as the European Centre for Development Policy Management have also presented various scenarios for the future of the ACP group in itself and in relation to the European Union. The European Union's European Neighbourhood Policy aims at bringing Europe and its neighbours closer. International organizations. The Union as a whole is increasingly representing its members in international organizations. Aside from EU-centric organizations, the EU, or the Community, is represented in a number of organizations. Full rights member. the G8, the World Trade Organization, partner, the International Development Association, Pacific Islands Forum, Dialogue member, the ASEAN Regional Forum, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, observer, the United Nations, the Organization of American States, the Council of the Baltic Sea States, the Australia Group, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the G10, the Non-Aligned Movement Nuclear Suppliers Group, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, and the Zanga Committee. The EU is also one of part of the Quartet on the Middle East, represented by the High Representative. At the UN, some officials see the EU moving towards a single seat on the UN Security Council. The European Union is expected to accede to the European Convention on Human Rights. In 2005, the leaders of the Council of Europe reiterated the desire for the EU to accede without delay to ensure consistent human rights protection across Europe. There are also concerns about consistency in case law. The European Court of Justice is already treating the Convention as though it was part of the EU's legal system to prevent conflict between its judgments and those of the European Court of Human Rights. Protocol No. 14 of the Convention is designed to allow the EU to accede to it, and the Treaty of Lisbon contains a protocol binding the EU to joining. The EU would not be subordinate to the Council, but would be subject to its human rights law and external monitoring as its member states are currently. It is further proposed that the EU join as a member of the Council once it has attained its legal personality in the Treaty of Lisbon, where the EU itself isn't represented, or when it is only an observer. The EU treaties places certain duties on member states. 1. Member states shall coordinate their action in international organizations and at international conferences. They shall uphold the Union's positions in such forums. The High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy shall organize this coordination in international organizations and at international conferences where not all the member states participate. Those which do take part shall uphold the Union's positions. 2. In accordance with Article 24, member states represented in international organizations or international conferences where not all the member states participate shall keep the other member states and the High Representative informed of any matter of common interest. Member states which are also members of the United Nations Security Council will concert and keep the other member states and the High Representative fully informed. Member states which are members of the Security Council will, in the execution of the functions, defend the positions and the interests of the Union, without prejudice to the responsibilities under the provisions of the United Nations Charter. When the Union has defined a position on a subject which is on the United Nations Security Council agenda, those member states which sit on the Security Council shall request that the High Representative be invited to present the Union's position.